Well, good afternoon or good evening, I guess, depending on where you're at. So we're just getting started with this live stream today, Thursday, January 23rd. Tomorrow, Friday, we're also hosting the webinar for how to visit Brooks Falls and Katmai from King Salmon. Give me one second. Got too much going on in my ear. There we go. That's better. So, um, basically, today I really want to talk about because it's been coming up a lot while we've been just kind of taking quite a few reservations here this last month or so for basically what we've got left for the upcoming 2025 season is, and the main topic is going to be to try and not cram too much stuff into a single day because we keep getting a lot of requests to do, like Valley of 10,000 Smokes and bear viewing and Margot Creek. And in a lot of cases, people are trying to do all of those things uh, at the same time. Is that you probably need a full day for each activity that you want to do. So if you are wanting to fish, that's going to be all day. If you're wanting to do bear viewing, that's a whole day. If you want to go to Valley 10,000 Smokes, that's its own day. While you certainly can cram things into less time, I really recommend not doing that because there just isn't enough time in a day to do all of those things in one day without, kind of shorting yourself in some way or another. You're likely going to end up missing some of the opportunities you would have had if you had spent the whole day on it. I know that maybe that doesn't fit everybody's budget or everybody's time constraints, and there's probably the exception there. But if you can afford to have multiple trips over to Brooks Camp, or if you can afford to have the time to spend 2 or 3 nights in King Salmon, or if you're lucky enough to win 2 or 3 nights at the lodge, that's going to be a much better overall experience than trying to do it all just for the sake of doing it. Because it just seems like it's a reoccurring thing to try and spend like a single night in King Salmon and go to Brooks, and then there are a few people who want to also stack the Valley 10,000 Smokes tour on top of that as well. And so I think that that's probably not necessarily the best decision. It does end up putting a lot of pressure on people to try and get all of that done, and so I just don't think that that's a good idea. So I am going to switch here to the map just to kind of give you guys an idea on where that stuff's at and how it actually happens, because it seems like it just gets missed often. For anybody who's joining, if you get any questions, please drop them in the comments. I am monitoring. I am down to one monitor right now, so it's hard for me to see all of the comments as they come through, but I am watching the stream on my phone as well. So if you got any comments or questions, feel free to drop them there. And then I'll switch over and check on the YouTube comments as well. So you guys are going to actually see the streaming software that I use because I'm on this one monitor trying to do everything. So it can be a little bit more challenging to watch everything. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the comment section. And then there'll probably be a few people that joined kind of late. We sent the broadcast email out kind of late that we were jumping on. But we are going to just go ahead and press on with the show anyways. So, as some of you guys probably know, King Salmon is located just west of the Katmai National Park border, and then about, I want to say it's around 10, 15, maybe 20 miles from King Salmon to Brooks Camp itself, and the Brooks River over here, which is situated between Lake Brooks and Naknek Lake. And then this lake over here on this side is actually how you get to Margot Creek. So it's about 12 miles further. And then the Valley of 10,000 Smokes is over in this direction as well. And you take a bus to get over to the Valley tour. So we have had some people who've asked if we fly over, if you'll get to see the Valley 10,000 Smokes from the air on your way to Brooks Camp. You will not. It's quite a bit further than Brooks Camp, and there's just some obstructions here, so you can't actually see the Valley of 10,000 Smokes real well from the air on your way to Brooks, because typically, so this is a valley here over Lake Brooks, so is this coming around the lake, and you're descending oftentimes below these ridge lines, so you're not going to be able to see the valley tour from the air, or the Valley of 10,000 Smokes from the air. You will need to either book a separate flight scene tour to do that, or take the bus tour that's from the MPS and Brooks Lodge to do that. And that road leads out to the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. It's about an hour drive or so. I don't know that you can see it real well where the road goes to the trailhead, and then you can walk down into the valley if you choose to, and that's where you'll have lunch. So that's just something to consider if you're wanting to do that. And that is an all-day tour. I think it starts at like 9. It's like between, yeah, it's like give or take, you're basically all day between 9 and 4, 4:15, if there aren't any delays, like bears or something on the road on your way there or on your way back. And so it just, even if you're on the latest return with like Katmai Air, it really might give you maybe an hour, which is basically a speed walk to the falls and a speed walk back to the airplane, to be able to do that. And that's assuming there's no wait time at the falls platform or anything like that. So I really would advise against it, just because it is such a quick, well, it's such a long day to do the valley tour, and then a very, very short period of time to actually be able to go bear viewing at the falls. So they really do both deserve a dedicated day if you can afford to do that, whether it's monetarily or a time constraint. We know it's expensive, but I would really highly recommend not doing both in the same day for that reason. We've had, I don't know, we've probably seen 2 or 3 thousand people come through over the last 2 or 3, usually disappointed with the experience because they either A, didn't get enough time for bear viewing, or B, they didn't get a chance to do the valley tour because they didn't have enough time, um, because they chose bears over that. And so I would just recommend not doing those in the same day, if possible. So that would kind of be my recommendation there. And that is unfortunate, but that's just the reality of the location and the way the tours are scheduled, and the amount of time it takes to do this kind of stuff. So, and then if you want to fish, of course, most of that's going to happen down here on the Naknek River between King Salmon and the lake. And I would recommend, dedicating its own day to that as well. You might be able to sneak in like a half day or something, if you want to do like a short bear viewing day, or maybe you're doing a half day of fishing on your arrival departure day, just depending on availability with the guides. But again, I really do think it deserves its own day, so that you can experience the river and not feel like you're just, you just spent 8 hours at Brooks and now you're going to come put waders on and just try and cram in some fishing. I just don't think that it's necessarily worth it. Just make sure all this is working. So that's kind of really what I wanted to talk about this evening, was that, because we've had a few people ask recently about trying to get all that stuff in a single day, and it really is just too much. Another common thing that's come up recently on a couple of the Facebook pages we watch is that people want to go bear viewing at Margot Creek, and I think I talked about it a little bit last week, but it is more complicated than what most people think it's going to be, and it's a little more involved. So Margot Creek is a little bit further back into the park, and it's actually right here. So there's this little sandbar that kind of forces the river over this direction, and you'll have to, get in here and then wade across that, and then you go up the river, and it's actually quite a ways up into the river before we start to actually see some bears. And there can be a lot of bears there. They won't be in the concentration that you'll see at Brooks Falls, just because there's not as many fish, so they're spread out. But there's a good chance for seeing them. But this is a difficult walk through the marsh, and most of it's going to be in the river. And so a lot of times the fitness level that's required is not, what somebody is expecting to do. It's very different to the trail over at Brooks, up to the falls, where it's just a flat, basically paved trail. It is dirt and gravel, but it's basically flat almost all the way up. There's a slight incline. And you're not doing any bushwhacking, and you obviously don't need to walk in the river. And so that's something that's quite different about Margot Creek. It is more remote. There aren't very many people, but having an operator take you back, expect to pay a little extra to do that, and then also be prepared to do some walking and some waiting, because it's not as simple as visiting Brooks Camp. And the window for good bear viewing at Margot Creek is very small. And I would say the consistency of the bears is not nearly as good or as predictable as it is at Brooks Camp. And so people need to understand that it might be quite, an additional 20, 30 minutes to get back there by boat, or another 10 minutes by plane. And there's no guarantee that you're going to see bears when you get back there. And that window is very, very small. It's sometime between the middle of August to maybe the last 2 or 3 days. You might still be okay over there, but the bears really only wander off. The well-known bears typically wander off for a week or two. It's not like the entire month of August is that way, because I've seen some negative comments recently about August on a couple of Facebook pages. And if you take the snapshot of a single day or a couple hours on one day, it may seem like the bear viewing at Brooks has, not as good, which, if we're talking about quantity of bears, yes, there are certainly less bears in August at Brooks, but there's almost no wait time ever for the main platform, and there's almost always at least a few bears, even if it's two or three. If you need to, or feel like you need to experience 40 bears at Brooks Camp in a single day, then you probably really need to be booking 18 months to 2 years in advance uh, to reserve dates in July. But if you just want to see a few bears, two, three, four, maybe even as many as 10 or 12 bears, there's a lot of window of opportunity for that kind of experience at Brooks, and a whole lot less people, without needing to go to the extreme of Margot Creek or a different location. While those are excellent bear viewing opportunities, they don't offer the consistency of Brooks Camp. And so, typically we try to steer people away from making that decision unless it's something, they're really on a different level. I'd call it an adventure level, where they're willing to spend the extra money and the extra time to get up there and really have that unique experience. Because for most people, bear viewing at Brooks Camp is, I just say, is more than adequate for what people are looking for. So that's kind of what I think I have to say about Margot Creek today. The next one is going to be, and it's really hard to reach people who aren't thinking about it yet, but I can't reiterate enough making the decision to book this stuff ahead of time, and not to wait until the last minute, not wait till the year of, to actually book the trip. We really should, or you should be thinking about booking this stuff 18 to 24 months in advance. Because if you're waiting until like January to book stuff for this July, or August, or even September, a lot of that stuff is sold, typically at least 12 months in advance. Like July is probably our heaviest booking month for the following year. But even the people booking in July are kind of working around other existing reservations, because we typically find that people that really are set on a certain set of dates, so like this year right now, it seems like between July 10th and July 25th is what most people are after. Which I know it sounds like a big window, but when you've only got maybe 100 beds in King Salmon, it doesn't take very long for those to get filled. And then as far as transportation to Brooks Camp from King Salmon, well, those same people occupying those rooms and those beds are the same people that are probably going to Brooks. And so it just doesn't leave a whole lot of availability for doing, a day trip from King Salmon, which is the closest departure point basically to Brooks Camp. And so it ends up leaving you with limited options from Kenai, Homer, or from Anchorage. So I would just keep that in mind as you're kind of thinking, if you haven't decided, or if you know someone who's interested in going, or you're telling your friends about your trip, that you're letting them know that if they really, want to have the best dates, they need to be thinking about this, 1 to 2 years ahead of time. While we certainly would love to accommodate last minute travelers, most of the time we don't have the availability to do it, and we really hate letting people down. So if you can book the stuff further out, that would be, kind of the better option there. So I would, keep that in mind if you're thinking about planning the trip. Trying to think what else that I wanted to cover tonight. On that same note about booking ahead of time, we do offer some flexible payment options where we can help spread out the cost over the next 18, months basically, so that it can feel and be a little more affordable, because we know that it can feel expensive to spend or drop, a couple $1,000s all at once. Even if you break it up into 1 or 2 payments, it still can be a lot. We do offer some monthly payment options where you can just basically, like a layaway plan, there's a deposit, and then you can kind of split it up over the next few months. And we find that for a couple, you can have a decently planned Katmai trip for about $200 a month. And just depending on how much you're doing, it might be a little bit more, a little bit less. It will ultimately determine how that is, because we just divide up whatever your total is after the deposit, across however many months are remaining between now and, or when you book, and the travel date. So those are probably the two biggest things to consider. Is price, and then ultimately, deciding when you're going to actually make the trip out to King Salmon and then over to Brooks. So let's see what else. Last time I mentioned this, if you come to Katmai B&B's website, and you go to the blog section, we have some pretty lengthy articles on how to plan the trip. Here's an article on when to book it. There's another trip on, or article on, actually the guide to, ultimate guide to king salmon Alaska, so you can understand everything about king salmon, when to, why you should consider Brooks Camp in August. I'm not saying August is the right month for everybody, but why you might consider August. Also, how to get from King Salmon to Katmai, if you're wondering about what your options are for getting over there. And then this article here, I have this graph here that gives you an idea on really when we're going to experience peak bears and peak crowds, and then how it kind of tapers off into September and October. Um, so that's really kind of all in here, and they're I wouldn't say they're long articles, but they're certainly pretty detailed when it comes to making decisions about when the right time to visit is, and what you're looking for. So you can find all that stuff here in our blog. You can also check out our YouTube channel, where I post a couple videos talking about, booking your trip, planning your trip, and, of course you can go back and rewatch the live streams there, and on Facebook at any time. So anytime you feel like checking those things out, you're more than welcome to do that. And if you got any questions, you can shoot us an email or reach out to us here on the Facebook page or on YouTube and leave us a comment. Get back to you and answer your question as best we can. Let's see what the other thing that came up recently. I got an email, someone asking about camera gear, which we've covered pretty extensively in the past. Um, but if you guys ever have questions about what gear, what camera you should be bringing, we're happy to cover that kind of stuff. So I personally shoot a Canon R6 Mark II because I do a combo between video and some stills. And so I typically shoot both, um, videos and stills. So that's why I shoot the Canon R6. If you're primarily a photo shooter, you might want to use R3, or if you've got lots of money, I guess maybe an R1. And then most of the focal lengths that we use are between 100 to 500 is what I do almost all of my shooting on exclusively. Typically don't shoot any wider than that. 100 millimeter there on the full frame, and almost never do I feel like 500 isn't enough in terms of length, and then you can always crop in a little bit if you need more, but I think that that's typically pretty good focal length for shooting from the falls there at Brooks Camp. So does anybody have any questions about anything that I can answer, for you guys, or anything I haven't covered today that you might be thinking about or anything like that? Feel free to drop it in the comments, just so that I can get those questions answered for you. And then, of course, if you aren't signed up for it already, we are hosting a webinar on like how to actually like all the logistics of planning the trip from uh, King Salmon to Katmai, lodging, flights, transportation options. We do also cover options from Anchorage and from Homer, which are the other two main departure locations for getting to Katmai. We can always talk about what it's like to visit the Katmai coast, because there are some operators that come to the other side, or they visit Lake Clark National Park as well. While I'm not an expert on Lake Clark, it is obviously pretty accessible. It's not that far from Anchor Point or from Homer to get over to Lake Clark. So we can kind of talk about who some of those operators might be, and how to actually do that trip. So if you got questions about any of that, feel free to drop them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer those questions. But that's basically what I've got for this right here right now. So that's kind of, want to cover that stuff. And one of the things that I think, um, I think that I want to talk about, and this is kind of this is our opinion, this is my thought here, is that the number of visitors that's visiting Brooks Camp each year continues to increase, and the lack of oversight from operators, because their primary business model is to just drop people off at Brooks and leave, and just allow people to self-guide themselves at Brooks. While we do think that there's a place for that, I do think that the number of visitors is potentially creating a problem over the next few years, with the total number of people visiting Brooks and the limited staff that the park is able to provide there in terms of monitoring human bear interaction. While they certainly do a good job of educating people, they obviously can't make sure that every interaction is a positive one, or that it's going the way that it should be. And so that is why Katmai Expeditions, the business that we run, offers exclusively guided bear viewing trips. And a lot of times those get, by some customers, are viewed as negative, as, why would I need a guided bear viewing trip versus a self-guided trip? It's for multiple reasons. One, we are very familiar with the bear activity on a day-to-day basis, because we're there basically 100 days a year. Whereas on a self-guided trip, you might only be there one of 100 days each year. And so if it's, a really busy day in July, we certainly would expect you to easily find bears located at the falls. But if it's a slower day in June or August, really knowing which bears are likely to be where is one of the huge added benefits of having somebody with you that's there on a daily basis. But the other one is that there's a real possibility that you're going to encounter bears on the trail or on the way to the falls or on the beach. And having staff who is educated and understands the rules, whether it's your first time to Brooks or your 10th, there is a huge added benefit there that the person that you're with really understands what needs to happen to make sure to keep you and the bears safe, which is really kind of what's important here. Most of the people we take to go see the bears at Brooks are, quite honestly in love with them. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to take people to go see these bears. And we want to, make sure that we're doing everything we can so that that can continue to happen. But unfortunately, because not everyone is required to have a guide at Brooks, and I'm not suggesting that they should be, but we do have, and just like anywhere, you have some bad apples, and it leads to negative bear-human interactions. And our biggest concern always is that we don't want to impact the bear behavior or have them change habits or behavior because of human interaction. So we want to make sure that we're giving them as much space as possible and we're being respectful of their space and what they're doing. And I think that unfortunately, when we allow as many people self-guided as the park has been, is that it would, continue to potentially impact, bear behavior going forward. And so we want to be on the other side of that by limiting the number of people we take each year, and also making sure that we're not just following just the park rules, but that we really are going above and beyond that to make sure that we're not impacting bear behavior. Because that one's come up a few times in phone conversations and emails recently, which is why guided bear viewing versus self-guided. It does cost a little bit more. We do try and offer as much value there as we can by having, flexible transportation options where you're not tied to the boat or the airplane specifically. That we're not necessarily specific to one or the other. We want to get you there. That is our priority. And, the other priority is to make sure that we have as little impact on the bears while still allowing, people to visit Brooks Camp and see them there, because it is, it's unique and it is special. So being able to do that and do it well, basically has forced us into, having a guided bear viewing only type operation so that we can do that. And we also are pretty strict on the total number of people we take each day. It does ultimately end up getting reflected in the price. Yes, we're a little bit more than everyone else, but we really do try to provide a premium service. We're intimately involved with each person, visiting Brooks, and it's not just, let's see what's happening here. It's not just one person, it's not just you going over to Brooks Camp, getting dropped off, and then we'll come back and pick you up later. That's certainly not the experience we want people to have. And so I think that it's important for us to be able to do that, is to provide it as, as guided bear viewing, because if we're not providing it in that sense, then I think it becomes very difficult for us to make sure you're having the best possible experience if we're just dropping you off there at Brooks. And so I think that that's really kind of what, why we think that guided bear viewing is better, and it's more, I don't know that it's the best way to do it, but we don't think that self-guided is the future for Brooks Camp. We think that really more and more operators should be providing the guided service to as many people as they can so that people can have the best experience at Brooks while also making sure that the bears are safe and that we're being respectful of their space. So that's kind of my rant on, why we think that guided bear viewing is probably really the way to go, and why it's possibly better than self-guided, but we know that's not for everybody. So there are self-guided options out there if that's what you're looking for. Let's see what else we want to cover today. So we talked about that. We do get a lot of, I'm going to go to Google Flights real quick because that comes up a lot. A lot of people ask when is the best time to book their flights, and the truth is that the flight from King Salmon, or I guess we should do it from Anchorage. Anchorage to King Salmon is basically going to be the same price all summer. The longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. But this like 460 price to 500 is basically going to be what you should expect to pay whenever. So like this 530 looks like it's the most expensive, but these will go to $700 or $800 a ticket if you wait much longer. But a lot of times people are asking when they should book this flight and how much is it going to be and that kind of stuff. So and even these July tickets were 461 at one point, but as they start to sell out those seats, they start to raise the price. So you should really expect to pay around 450 for a round trip ticket in and out of King Salmon. So just those probably are not the dates you want, but it's something like in the middle of July. So I would be booking them now, certainly, and I would book them basically as soon as they're not necessarily available, but as soon as you know what dates you want to travel, I would be considering when to book that flight. But you're going to expect to pay between, so here's one $700 one already, about 450 to 500 per person round trip in and out of King Salmon. Nice. Hey, Sherry. Let's see. I got a couple on here. Becky, so I see your question there, Becky. Do you guys know most of the bears? I would say no. There's quite a few bears that visit Brooks Camp, and I definitely don't know all of them. We know some of the famous ones. You know, a lot of people know Chunk and Razor, 747, and the goalie and backpack, and there's a few other ones. Those are like the most well-known bears. But in July this year, there was a day there were almost 40 bears. I couldn't have named half, or even given you numbers for half. So ultimately, it really depends on how into the bears you are. There are certainly people who know the bears much better than we do. We don't know each bear's number or name all that well. We're pretty familiar with bear activity and where they're at and what they're doing. That's kind of really what we're good at. But as far as bear identification goes, we're not experts. Gene, so answering Gene's question here from YouTube, how many miles do you generally hike around Katmai? I would say that on an average day for us, Gene, uh, each trip to the falls from the lodge is basically a mile. So let me just kind of zoom in. And if you include all in all, so like I typically wear my Samsung smartwatch, if you got an Apple Watch, most of my days as the captain, I end up walking about 5 miles, just kind of hanging out, checking on everybody, checking on the boat, and that kind of stuff. The guides and the clients typically average closer to 10 so like we're going to drop off or you're going to unload from the airplane or from the boat in this area, typically right here near the visitor center. You get your bear orientation. There's a set of bathrooms here, and there's another set of bathrooms that's open to the public up by the lodge, and then at the lodge itself is where you can have some lunch. There's a picnic area over here by the visitor center. So you'll walk that, get the bear orientation, you head out onto this platform. Kind of, there's this little viewing platform, which is probably kind of blurry here in the stream, but you can see bears from there, and then there's another platform off of the main walkway here and here on the north side and the south side of that platform. So depending on what months you're there, there may or may not be that many bears present down here on the lower river, but you'll walk that. You'll walk up the trail. There's another restroom here before it splits, and then you'll walk up the Brooks Falls Trailhead is what they're calling it. So the direction to head up to the falls. And from the visitor center to the falls is basically 1.2 miles. We're just going to call it a mile because you're probably not going to backtrack all the way to the visitor center very often. but it is fairly common for people to have lunch while they're there in an 8-hour day. So we're going to do this at least once, right? So there's, we'll call that 2.5 miles between the lodge and the falls. And so that's one round trip. And then you're going to do another round trip. So now we're basically at 5 miles plus any extra steps doing anything else. You know, if you walk to the visitor center or if you walk up to the cultural site that's up here and then back, typically if you walk down to the boat or the airplane to grab something and then you come back, I'd say that normally people are walking somewhere in the 7 to 10 mile range, depending how much hiking they want to do. If you make the walk all the way up to Lake Brooks, if you come up all this way to the lake itself where the river starts, which it's really just hiking for the sake of hiking. You may see a bear up here or two, or you might even encounter one on the trail. Then that's an added bonus. But if you make that walk up there and then back, you're certainly going to be in the 10 to 12 mile range in a regular day. And if you make this walk back and forth the falls multiple times, you could easily be at 10 miles. So that's not to discourage anybody from doing it. We've helped people with significant mobility challenges do it, wheelchairs, crutches, canes. We've done it all. But just be aware that, it is quite a bit of walking. So wear some comfortable shoes while you do it, because it can be a lot. Let's see, what else was we were talking about flights. Yeah. So, and Sherry's an expert travel agent. She'd probably concur $400, but you certainly could pay $700 or $800 if you wait a long time and your travel dates are in July. So you want to think about that. The other thing I wanted to do here was I'm going to bring up a fresh sheet because this comes up a lot. I'll just do a blank sheet here. I get a lot of people who ask, and they're debating the cost of actually doing the trip and from where, and how much that's going to be, how much it's really going to be. So I want to just put it all um, on a spreadsheet so everyone can see here that's watching this, or that gets a chance to watch this, because a lot of people are trying to decide if they're saving any money by doing this from King Salmon or from Anchorage or Homer. And so I just want to put them all in these different categories so that we can see kind of definitively, because I've done it plenty and I know that King Salmon is a little less expensive on average, but it ultimately, just so that people can see and it outline. So we're going to put hotel, because everyone's going to need a hotel in each of these places. Because even if you're doing a day trip from Anchorage or Homer, you're going to end up with all that stuff as well. Let's see, how do I want to lay this out? Hotel. In some cases, you're not going to need a rental car, so I'm not going to put it there. But you are if you're going to do the trip from Homer. And then let's just label this the Brooks trip. And we'll just call this food. And for the sake of this, we'll assume that all your meals are going to be the same price regardless. Yeah, that's spot on, Sherry. You're definitely not going to get it for less. And $460 is honestly probably a good price. You might be able to find like a $380 or something if you're lucky and you're traveling in like May. But as far as traveling between June and the end of August or September, that's basically what you're going to pay, or more if you wait too long. So hotels on average in Anchorage are going to be about $350. You could probably find something cheaper, but you certainly could find something that's more. Homer is going to be about the same, and we'll come up with some real world examples there. King Salmon is probably going to be slightly more, but we'll just call it 400 because that's kind of be the average between all those. The Brook trip, you wouldn't necessarily need a rental car in Anchorage, but you're going to need an Uber over to, or something, some way to get over to Merrill Field or Lake Hood. So we'll just call this 35, which is probably on the low end, but we'll call it 35 bucks. Homer, you're going to need a rental car for 2 days. This might honestly be lowballing it at 400, but I would guess that's probably $200 a day is reasonable. King Salmon, you don't need a rental car. You'll get shuttled everywhere there. Brooks trip, it's going to be basically 1,500 bucks. You might be able to find it for a little more, a little less, give or take, depending on where you're at. Let me make this bigger for you guys. Let's see if we go 200, that's not bad. And then the Brooks trip from King Salmon, yeah, it's just, we'll do the Katmai Expeditions price for guided bareboon, but we could swap it for self-guided as well. For food, for one person in a day, let's just do 80 bucks. You could do it for less, but I feel like if you eat out every meal, that's basically fair. I'll call these all dollars. I don't need all that. Dollars and dollars. And I'll even be a little more fair here. So Katmai B&B is one of the most expensive lodging in King Salmon. We'll put it $450 per night. And we will do the total for these trips. And this is a per person price. It does get a little less expensive when you go to 2 people, but we'll still show it just the same so that you guys can see. And then hopefully it's helpful to you too, Sherry, because this is like a lot of times what people ask me when they talk to me, and they ask what. Yeah, so that's pretty average there, Denise. It really just, I'm gonna guess those are probably July dates. That's pretty standard. That's what I would expect to pay. So this, a lot of you people who are here with me now have already either traveled with me or are going to travel with me. So these numbers probably are not new to you, but I want to, show this so that people who have not traveled before to King Salmon or have gone to Brooks, they can kind of see how we do our math. And a lot of times we tell people that King Salmon ends up being one of the best options for visiting Brooks Camp. It ends up being less, and it ends up being probably the most amount of time. That's the one variable here that I don't include on this. Usually is from Anchorage, about 6. So this is the one. So this is going to be 6 hours at Brooks. So this is actually time on the ground there at Brooks Camp. And this is where a lot of people, if this is all you have time for, all you can fit into your budget, in terms of like how many days you have available there in Alaska, and you've only got a single day, then yeah, Anchorage or Homer might make the most sense. But if you can afford two nights in King Salmon, you're going to end up with roughly 8 hours if you use hour service over at Brooks Camp, and it is going to cost you less. And then the real multiplier here becomes the total number of guests. So we'll just I'm going to put 2 here. So if we had 2 guests, then we can take this and multiply it by this one. So if you had 2 guests going, it ends up being significantly more. And I guess that's probably not fair, because that would be multiplying everything by 2. So we don't want to do that. But this number doubles, right? So if your trip from Anchorage to Brooks for 2 people would be 3,000, and same with this. And this one was 1,300 total. So now if you're doing the trip from Anchorage to Brooks Camp in a single day, rental car stays the same. Your food would technically double as well because you got to pay for two people to eat. But you still only need one hotel room. You only need one rental car or one Uber. But the Brooks trip now is 3,000, and so you can kind of see. So even if you got a good deal on these two, they'd have to be significantly less. And Katmai B&B, the most expensive room in King Salmon. You're getting breakfast. You don't need a rental car. Provide all the shuttle service. Guided bear view into Brooks with the flexibility of the boat or the airplane, plus the food. Is still significantly less. And then we can add in the Alaska Air flight. So I'll add that because you wouldn't need that in those other two. And we'll say we'll use Denise's 510. Or if it was going to be for two people, then you end up being, what is that, 1,020? So it's still, on the low end saves you about $500. On this one, it saves you almost 1,000, and that's including the Alaska Air flight. And these two don't have that. So it is still quite a bit cheaper to do the trip from King Salmon. Plus, you get extra time there and the flexibility of the boat or the airplane. Whereas these two are going to be float plane only, and you have at least one transfer if you're doing this with Katmai Air. There are a couple of operators that go straight to Brooks from Anchorage, and those are like 3.5 to 4 hour flights. If you use Katmai Air or Alaska Air, it's a 1 hour down to King Salmon and then 30 or 40 minutes over, plus the transfer time between the airplanes. From Homer, I think it's maybe 2.5 hours, 2 hours to Brooks Camp. From Homer in the airplane, you should expect about 6 hours. And this is, again, no weather delays on either of those. You should get about 6 hours. And then from King Salmon, we're aiming for 8. Obviously, we're subject to weather delays as well. But because we're closer, if this gets shortened by 2 hours, you're looking at 4. If we get shortened by 2 hours, you're looking at 6 still, if that ends up happening. So pretty significant savings, and you've got that flexibility and more time. If let me know if you guys can see that. It looks like you can see it okay. It might be a little bit blurry. But if you got any questions, let me know. Cherry, you can let me know if I'm not being realistic on the hotel and rental car prices here. I know you could probably stay at like the Puffin Inn or something for less than $350 in Anchorage. I don't know how many lodging options there are for Homer, but I guess we could look. What's this hotel? Let's just see what we can find. I would expect that that's probably what we're going to see. Let's pick mid-July. We need at least 2 nights. Let's see what we find. So lakefront is typically what I recommend, so that would kind of be my price if we're going to stay downtown in Anchorage. You probably can find, some stuff. I like the Puffin Inn 209. The staff is very nice at the Puffin Inn, but it's not the nicest hotel in Anchorage. But I'm just like kind of basing stuff based on what we charge based on the services you receive to some of the stuff here in Anchorage. So like Lakefront is one of the most popular. It's right on Lake Hood. I've recommended it a lot. It feels very Alaskan, which is important to some people. So like even on their, I don't know who's selling at 401, one of these other travel sites, but so I'm really not that far off here, and I might even be being kind here at 350, saying that you could get a hotel in Anchorage mid-July for 350 because it's probably really like 400. I think I'm pretty spot on there on the slash Uber. For Homer, you're probably not gonna Uber, but you are gonna end up. Let's look in Homer what we can get a hotel for. Okay, we're not staying in Vegas. Homer, Alaska hotels. Let's see. Am I still mid-July? Yeah. Thing really doesn't want me to zoom in. All right. And I don't want to compare. I mean, I guess you could maybe stay somewhere for $100, maybe. I would be shocked. Yeah. So we're really just like 270 for that hotel. This modern looking Airbnb looks like they're 350, or maybe it is not an Airbnb. It's their little private cabins. Those look really nice. Um, that is an Airbnb. That's King's Landing Hotel. Let's see what prices we actually get. It's like 200. So we'll adjust the Homer hotel price and be a little more fair. We'll say it's 280. Kind of seems to be the middle there. And then rental cars. Let's see what that really costs. Mid-July. Sherry probably already knows the answer to this. I totally agree. Lake Hood, Coast and Lake Hood, about 360. Yeah, so we'll leave bulk. I'll call this fair here at 380 there. Sherry will split it, the difference there between something that's 360 and the lakefront at 400. Homer's 280. Rental cars. I'll be fair and we'll shop kayak just so that we're getting everything. Same July dates we needed for those. 2 dates, that's maybe realistic. Noon, I don't think you can get back to Anchorage by noon. 4. You probably really need to leave that morning. 8:30 search. So we're not going to use Turo because people are always kind of indifferent about using Turo. Well, I have used it successfully. Um, it's not necessarily people's cup of tea because it's not as streamlined as booking from one of these guys. Um, yeah, so that's, I mean, the least expensive option on here is 392. That's not Turo. So I'm going to leave that at 400, and then you can kind of see the price difference there. So it still ends up, yeah, current, ever since 2020, 21, share after the pandemic, it basically has been outrageous to rent a car. So, I've got everything here really to be fair. So we've got a hotel in King Salmon. You don't need a rental car or an Uber. Almost all the facilities, Katmai Air, the water taxi, Katmai Expeditions, all provide shuttle service. The trip to Brooks itself, $1,300, and that's a guided bear green trip. If you're self-guided, then it would be, I'm just going to round up, it would be 1,000. It really is like 480 right now, but we're going to leave it at 1350 since that's the most expensive option. Food for the day for 2 people, and this is all for 2 people, which I don't think I've like made clear here. This is for 2 guests. Yeah, so this is for 2 guests. If you're a single guest and you want to, and you're traveling by yourself, then this obviously would be less. Some of the stuff's not going to change. Rental car is going to be the same. Food will be less. Trip King Salmon, even when we're looking at all this, it does take up 2 nights of your time. So if you're looking at a short Alaska trip, like maybe you're only coming for 5 days, and it's probably not the best option because it's going to eat up a lot of your time there in Alaska. But if you're coming for 5 days and you're spending 3 of them at Brooks Camp and 2 days in Anchorage, then it's probably still the better option. And this is not necessarily the least expensive way to do it. I do have the most expensive lodging in King Salmon in here at Katmai Bed and Breakfast, where we provide, continental style breakfast and all the transportation. We basically plan your trip for you at no additional cost. when you're coming through King Salmon to go to Brooks. And so it is a little bit more. If you're coming as a bigger group, again, there is some savings there because we have rooms or cabins available that sleep more than two. So you don't necessarily need to book 3 rooms at $495. You could book one cabin if you're a family of 4, or if you're like okay sleeping with your buddies, or sharing a cabin with your buddies. You could save quite a bit there. The most expensive cabins like 460, and there's a little fee for additional people beyond the first two. It's like $10 or something. So you might only be looking at like 510 per night for, I don't know, what is that, like 4 people, 5, 6 people or something. So a good option there if you want to split that up and save there on the room cost. So yeah, just kind of wanted to recap that because we get a lot of people that ask, and I don't know that I've ever built out this spreadsheet for anybody in real time on what it really costs to do it. So yeah, hotels in Anchorage, you could do it for less if you wanted, but I mean, you'd have to make it like close. You'd have to find a hotel room for $100 a night. Feel free to shop around. I don't know that that's worth it. And now we're close to the king salmon price, but you're probably really, like Sherry and I were saying here, you're probably really spending 380 depending on where you want to stay. If you end up staying at like the Hilton or something, you're going to spend more than 400. Lakefront is around 400. Sherry suggested Coast Inn at Lake Hood. It's about 360-ish, give or take, depending on your dates. Homer, I found some less expensive options, but because of that rental car, it becomes quite, it's pretty significant additional expense. And I guess I didn't put fuel in there, but we'll just leave that out for the sake of this. But you're not getting a rental car mid-July for less than $400, and that's just for the 2 days if you could squeeze it in. And then you got to rush back to Anchorage to turn it back in if you didn't need it for longer than that. So keep that in mind when you're deciding if that's going to be what's right for you. That's cool, Sherry. Yeah, so that's helpful. If you are doing the day trip from Anchorage, it looks like Lakefront and Coast Inn both have shuttles. I know they have shuttles to the main airport. Maybe if they run over to Merrill Field or where at exactly on Lake Hood there, Sherry. That might be helpful info. I know that they run back and forth between the main airport, but I don't know if they run anywhere on Lake Hood or if they go to Merrill Field, because I know some of the other operators operate out of those 2 locations. But in any case, so you might be able to save that $35 if you didn't need the Uber. Again, it doesn't change. You're not saving $500 by doing that. You're just going to save a couple bucks, but every dollar counts. This trip is expensive. And then from Homer, like I said, you might be able to save some money in the hotel room, but you're not escaping this rental car cost, and then the trip is going to be roughly this. So I use the Katma Air pricing here for the Brooks trip. You may find an operator who does it for a little less. I don't think so. Basically, everybody's $1,500 per person for the Brooks trip out of Anchorage and Homer. If you've got a really large group and you can charter an airplane, it might work out, but then when you've got 6 or 7 people, then weight becomes an issue. So even if you've got the numbers to make it work, you might be too heavy for the airplane, because you are going to go with full fuel plus some extra usually, and so that can offset whatever savings you thought you might have had, because you end up having to need two airplanes. So that's kind of, hopefully you guys find this information useful. I don't know if you guys can watch this, pause this later, go back and screenshot it if you're still thinking about, which one is the right one for me. And then we can kind of go over that stuff in more detail if you guys want to shoot me an email. But this is basically the pricing to do the trip for 2 people into King Salmon. And what I didn't do here is, like, these hotel rooms are not for 2 nights. That's just a single night. You can double them and come up with that number. So we'll call this 1,000, so you can see the true cost. What's that? 600 minus 40, so 540, 560. And then that's going to be what, 640, 660. So there's like the true cost between the three. So this would be for 2 nights in Anchorage, Homer, or King Salmon, the rental car or the Uber, no shuttle service, 1 day to Brooks Camp, food for that full day, the Alaska Air flight in and out of King Salmon for 2 people, and then the totals for 2 people. So like 38.55, 41.20 basically out of Homer, and then 35.30 out of King Salmon. This is going to be for 2 people for 2 nights, 1 full day at Brooks. Probably the only less tangible thing here about the trip from King Salmon is that because you're going to come in that afternoon, probably into King Salmon, you could decide to do a half day of fishing or a wildlife viewing tour on that half day of your arrival, and then leave early in the morning on your third day in King Salmon. It's not third full day, but the day after you go to Brooks. You could choose to stay another night and do another activity, or you could fly back to Anchorage, but you're going to get back to Anchorage pretty early on the Alaska Air flight, so you still have the afternoon once you get back to Anchorage to do something else or get in a rental car and drive somewhere. You could do that. And you're not going to really, because of the length of this trip, so this is 6 hours at Brooks, but it really is like a 10 or 11 hour day. So you're going to get started. You're going to go over to the float plane dock or wherever they're departing from at Homer. Same thing with leaving Anchorage. That's going to take 2 or 3 hours. You're going to leave there. You're going to fly 2 hours, 3 hours, get to Brooks, spend your 6 hours there if you don't have any weather delays or bear jams or anything like that. And then you're going to leave at like 2 or 3 o'clock. You're going to spend 3 hours flying back. You're going to get back there. It's going to be like 7 or 8 o'clock by the time you're back in your hotel room. Whereas the people who are staying in King Salmon, either are already, they're like had dinner and relaxed by the time these guys are getting back to their room or their hotel. And they have the opportunity to do other stuff beyond just the bear viewing on the front end or the back end of their trip. So that's kind of, I can't assign a dollar figure to that to be specific about how that ends up working out, but there is some added benefit there. That's totally up to you on how you spend that time, but this is basically the bare minimum to, go bear viewing and have 2 nights of lodging there in King Salmon, Homer, Anchorage. Thanks, Sally. Really appreciate the feedback. And yeah, ultimately it's up to everyone. I want everyone to understand the numbers and what it's going to cost to really make the trip happen. But King Salmon might not be the right option for everybody. So this isn't like a sales pitch, but a lot of times there's so many moving parts for people who are looking to plan the trip that it can be difficult to come up with like, what does this really cost? How much time does it really take? How much time am I going to get at Brooks? Can I do Valley of 10,000 Smokes and bear viewing and fishing all, can I do that in 2 days? The short answer is probably not really, but this kind of gives some structure around what you could expect to spend for 2 people, for 2 nights, 1 day of bear viewing from the 3 different options. So tomorrow, I'll mention it again here because I'm not sure how many people were on when I mentioned it before, is the webinar. So I've got like a 40 slide webinar where I teach people how to plan this trip. Some of you have already been with me and you've done it, so it's not maybe for you, but if you know somebody who's interested in going and you want to pass along the link, I will share it here so that you guys have it. If you want to attend, you're more than welcome to, whether you've been before or not. That's totally up to you guys. If you want to go, log in here real quick and get over to the stream. So there is the link to that. So you guys have that if you decide that you want to sign up or if you want to share that with somebody who might find it useful. We are going to go through that whole webinar this week. I don't know if that's clickable for mobile, but if you're on your computer, you can click it. Yeah, so if anybody wants to go to that, you're more than welcome to. And then we will continue to do the live streams on Thursday. I am traveling this Thursday, which is why I'm down to one monitor and the weird background. But I will be back in the office next Thursday for that live stream. I am going to wrap this up, though. We're kind of here at the end of our hour. So if anybody has any questions, now is a good time to drop it in the comments and I will answer it. And then we'll kind of just start to wrap things up here. Name this so I can open that back up later. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll answer them. And then we'll probably wrap this up here at like 5:15. Should give enough time to answer any questions if anybody has any. If not, we'll end it a little early. So I'll give that a minute for any of that to populate. Yeah, of course, Denise. Well, cool. If nobody else has got any other questions or if I miss one, I will watch the comments here for a little bit after we end the stream, just to make sure I get them all answered. But appreciate you guys stopping by and having the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you guys